Tonight at 10, out of the shadows, Afghanistan's new rulers present a public face to the world. The Taliban now control the streets, but say they won't harbour terrorists.
I reassure all internationals, the UN, all embassies, our neighbours, that we will not be allowing the soil of Afghanistan to be used against anybody.
There are guarantees girls can go to school and women will be allowed to work, but many have already lost faith.
As an Afghan woman, I wouldn't trust them because they don't have a very clear track record of keeping up their promises or something like that.
Here, the government is to announce plans for a resettlement scheme for Afghan refugees. Also tonight, in Haiti, a tropical storm hampers relief efforts as the number of dead from Saturday's earthquake reaches 1,900. Job vacancies hit 1 million, but companies still struggle to find workers. And a glimpse into deep space, explaining the mysteries of the stars.
In Northern Ireland, 300 new jobs at Wrightbus less than 2 years after it was rescued from administration. And Afghans living here speak of their fear for loved ones after the Taliban takeover.
And on reporting Scotland, troops from the Black Watch are set to deploy to Kabul airport in Afghanistan. And families who lost loved ones to COVID will find out in the next week if a separate Scottish public inquiry will be held.
In Wales today, Mohammed fled the Taliban 20 years ago. He's desperate for news of his family in Kabul. And making waves at a top international surfing competition. Now Alice Barton has her sights on the next Olympics.
Here in the east, horrifying and heartbreaking. The Afghans here fearing for their families after the Taliban takeover. And controlling knife crime with stop and search. But are enhanced powers being used too often in Milton Keynes?
Here in the Channel Islands, the hidden impact of the pandemic has demanded in Guernsey outstripped staffing. And scoring the hospital Jersey finally shows the public where its services are failing to meet targets.
Here in the east, as hundreds of troops from this region return to Afghanistan, we speak to the family of a 19-year-old soldier who was killed there. More at 10:30.
Here in the East Midlands, the former soldier who fought in Afghanistan says their mission was 100% worth it. And rubbish and recycling. We find out why so much of our waste is thrown out the wrong way.
Then at 10:30 tonight, hundreds of people will pay their respects to a leading member of the traveller community and her son. And the MP who wants urgent answers from the government over the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan.
Later on BBC London, as events unfold in Afghanistan, we get reaction here in London from Afghans living in the capital. And we meet the people hunting for treasure on the banks of the Thames.
And coming up on Look North, drug driving footage is released of the moment a 7-year-old was knocked from his bike. And care in crisis. 1,000 carers are urgently needed in North Yorkshire alone.
And in the Northwest, 3 women, 1 question. What's next for those left behind in Afghanistan? And how donated blood plasma will be used to treat the patients who need help at their sickest.
Here, a helping hand to hospitals, the volunteers guiding patients out of A&E to get the right mental health support. And top tips from a top chef, Tom Kerridge teaches children how to make healthy meals on a budget.
In the south, the volunteers in accident and emergency helping those who need mental health support. And calls for action against an unauthorised caravan site set up in rural Berkshire.
In the southeast, the vulnerable homeless people exposed to abuse, violence and death at their emergency accommodation. And going nowhere, the teenage drivers who can't book a test because of the backlog.
In the southwest, questions over mental health concerns answered. Plymouth gunman Jake Davison sought out and received support from a local service. And the farm that's helping youngsters who are struggling at school to find their future.
Coming up in Points West, with long waiting lists and 12-hour working days, we look at how our doctors are coping with demand. And the strain for grain. The West farmers begin their harvest after a year of extreme weather.
In the Midlands, in 25 minutes, a new, quicker and easier test for coronavirus developed at the University of Birmingham. And gold, silver and bronze, 3 boxing medalists on their Tokyo glory.
And on Look North tonight, a woman who fled Afghanistan 25 years ago speaks of her fears for the country now.
I cannot kind of accept this is happening again after 20 years.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News channel. That's how you do it. Liam Livingston leads the Phoenix to Lords. They're in the 100 final after crushing Northern Superchargers.
Good evening. Underlining the dramatic shift of power in Afghanistan, Taliban leaders who've never been seen in public before have been making their first statements on Afghan soil to a world still shocked by their lightning victory. They hope to calm a worried nation and the international community with assurances that Afghans who assisted international forces would come to no harm, that media freedoms would be protected, and that women would be allowed to study and work within Islamic principles. With the story of how the Taliban claims it will rule, here's our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet.
The Republic has fallen. Its leaders fled. Taliban rule is returning. Day by day, its fighters more visible on the streets of Kabul, patrolling with US military vehicles left behind or lost by government forces, taking on tasks to show they're in charge now, and showing the new face of Afghanistan to the world. Today, the first press conference by a man who's long been a mystery, Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid, showing his face in public for the first time, making their message clear.
I reassure all internationals, the UN, all embassies, our neighbours, that we will not be allowing the soil of Afghanistan to be used against anybody. We have given amnesty to everybody. There is no revenge. All those young people who have talent, who have got an education, we don't want them to leave.
Day by day, Afghans come to terms with the Taliban again, waiting not for words, but what will change in their lives.
Let's see what Afghanistan brings. I want to stay here. I want to fight for my students. I want to fight for our vision of Afghanistan. And I know things are never going to be the same anymore. It's just, I have to be here.
And so far, some surprises. Female presenters are still fronting popular news programs, a Talib taking her questions. But many fear it's just a shiny new show for now. Women are already taking to the streets. We exist, they shout. Work, education, political participation is our right. Women make up half of Afghan society. Don't upset us, they tell the Taliban. Be our voice. Today, the Taliban also focused on that fear.
There will be nothing against women in our ruling. Our people accept our women or Muslims. They accept Islamic rules. If they continue to live according to Sharia, we will be happy. They will be happy.
They've said that so many times before.
As an Afghan woman, I wouldn't trust them because they don't have a very clear, good track record of keeping up their promises or something like that. If they were so keen on women's rights, they wouldn't stop Herat girls from going to university. They wouldn't stop women working in Azizi Bank in Kandahar, right? So these are two different narratives.
With fighting finished, time for fun too, Taliban style. Not the usual image of austere Islamists, but it may be but a brief pause before new rules come into force. Look at just one snapshot of how many people, Afghans and foreigners, are fleeing as fast as possible. The evacuation from Kabul airport proceeds ever more urgently, including Britain's operations. The Taliban are promising stability too, and a government that's different this time round. Their words have changed. Many wait to see what they really mean.
Lise, plenty of assurances from the Taliban leadership, but how credible are they?
Clive, nice words are always nice, but they're just not enough, especially when they are words that have been heard so many times before. Take words like that women and girls will be given all of their rights within Islam. What does that mean? Afghanistan was the Islamic Republic with one of the most Islamic constitutions in the world. The Taliban kept saying it isn't Islamic enough. So then look at what we have seen on the ground in districts where they've been taking control in recent months. Yes, girls have been going to school, but in many cases only up to class 6. And yes, women have been going to work, but in many cases, as we just heard, some women journalists were told not to turn up for work. Some women were told that their jobs would go to men. And it's the same with other words too. They talked today about an amnesty. For what? To be forgiven for working with the government? And what about the promise not to allow Afghanistan to become a haven for extremist groups? Well, while all of this discussion, intense discussions going on among Afghans in capitals in the West, there's also huge chatter on jihadi websites. The Taliban victory over the West, the mighty US Army, has also been heralded by the extremist groups, including Al-Qaeda. They will also be watching what it means to have all the rights within Islam. So yes, the Taliban have changed, but have they changed as much as Afghanistan has, as well as the rest of the region and beyond?
OK, Lise, thank you for that. Lise Doucette reporting there. Well, despite the Taliban's assurances, many thousands of Afghans are desperate to leave the country. Here, the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, says the British government will announce plans for a resettlement scheme for refugees in due course. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
This is the push to get people out. Hundreds of troops are helping evacuate British nationals and Afghans who help foreign forces. But not everyone's eligible for a place on these planes, and those left behind may try to make their own way out. That's what Masood, which is not his real name, did. 3 years ago, just 16, he fled Afghanistan when the Taliban threatened his family. He said the illegal route was his only option, travelling on foot, in lorries and with people smugglers.
I couldn't talk because they had their guns and their sticks. You can't talk with them, they'll just beat you.
So how do you feel now, with your family are still in Afghanistan?
I don't have contact with my mom, with my sister.
You don't know where they are?
I don't know, and when I see the news every day, bomb blast, Taliban, this, that, fight, I'm very scared, you know what happened, are they alive or not?
With more refugees now expected, the government has promised a plan.
We'll be looking at a bespoke arrangement. We're a big-hearted nation, and we've always, as I know from my own history, as Pretty knows from hers, always been a country that's provided safe haven for those fleeing persecution.
This is fresh in many minds, the influx of refugees from Syria, which became a political point of tension. Some 20,000 were settled in the UK. A similar scheme is expected for Afghanistan, but there's no detail yet. Other countries have pledged to take thousands, and here there's pressure from all sides to come up with a fair, controlled system.
Is there a plan, is there a strategy for safe and legal routes for refugees to come out of Afghanistan, and how quickly can that be put in place?
We need to show leadership, and what I'm asking Boris Johnson to do is to recognise that we need to have a generosity of spirit. We need to make it clear that those that are vulnerable will have a welcome here.
We should open our doors. We need a reset of our foreign policy when it comes to migration, and I hope we'll hear that tomorrow.
Tomorrow there's an emergency sitting of Parliament. Expect more on this complex issue. Expect questions about the response so far.
The government says its immediate focus is evacuating British nationals and eligible Afghans, then setting up a system for refugees. Boris Johnson wants to convene a meeting of world leaders. The Foreign Secretary's talked about extra humanitarian aid. But ministers acknowledge they were caught out by the pace of events in Afghanistan. Now there is a sense of having to scramble to respond.
With so much at stake for so many, there are few simple solutions at this point, though plenty are looking to the government for some answers. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Westminster.
In the last few minutes, Downing Street says Boris Johnson has been speaking with President Biden about the situation in Afghanistan, and both welcomed mutual cooperation over the evacuation of expats and refugees. Our North America editor, John Sopel, is at the White House. John, what more do we know?
Yeah, interesting, Clive, because we had a briefing this lunchtime from Joe Biden's national security advisor when we were told that President Biden hadn't spoken to any foreign leaders, which I thought was fairly astonishing. He hadn't spoken to anyone since the fall of Kabul. Now got a readout of this meeting. I think it's very interesting what Number 10 have put out, because they've said the Prime Minister stressed the importance of not losing the gains made in Afghanistan over the last 20 years of protecting ourselves against any emerging threat. Now, Joe Biden, when he made his speech yesterday, wasn't talking about protecting the gains made in the last 20 years. He said America's job was not nation building, it was dealing with national security threats, and Al-Qaeda had been dealt with. So I think this is a pointed difference between Number 10 and the US administration. So interesting on that level. We've also seen from the US side an attempt to try to paint a more positive picture of what is going on, stressing not what has gone wrong over the past few days, but the ramping up of flights out of Kabul airport to take people to safety, talking about 7,000 to 9,000 people a day perhaps being able to leave the country, 4,000 troops on duty. And this is an attempt to change the narrative. I thought one other interesting thing, Clive, about all of this is that we heard from the National Security Advisor, him saying that we've received assurances from the Taliban that we will be able to go ahead with those flights. So clearly, there is someone from the administration talking to the Taliban, and that is significant in itself. On Taliban assurances that women will be treated differently, I think the attitude of the administration is very much that the proof will be in the pudding. Let's let deeds talk louder than words.
OK, John, thank you for that. John Sopel there, live at the White House. The Taliban's recapture of Afghanistan after being ousted 20 years ago poses difficult questions for British ex-servicemen and women and their families who fought in the Afghan war. Some veterans' charities say they're providing additional mental health support to former soldiers to help them cope with the events of the last week. Our home editor, Mark Easton, has more from Royal Wootton Bassett in Wiltshire.
This is the town that bowed its head to honour the fallen of Afghanistan. Hundreds of those killed in the conflict were driven through Royal Wootton Bassett from RAF Lynham, the last repatriation exactly 10 years ago tomorrow, a moment to be marked by a church service, an anniversary made more poignant by the events in Kabul. The local vicar is in touch with veterans and their families, trying to reconcile the human sacrifice with the chaotic scenes on their televisions.
The service is the same, whichever the war or the conflict. And I would never say to anyone in that situation that their service and duty was wasted.
Some people are saying it wasn't worth it.
The Christian faith says to me, there's no greater service than to lay down your life for your friends.
Many didn't think Jack Cummings would survive the war in Afghanistan. After losing both his legs, the bomb disposal specialist astonished doctors by not only recovering, but competing at the Invictus Games.
It looks like Jack Cummings is going to get on the medal podium, and he does! 55.22, Jack Cummings takes the bronze.
But it was a subdued Jack I met at his home. The Foreign Secretary has said his actions were not for nothing, but he's struggling right now.
I've been knocked to, I've been blown for six. I've been, you know, it's totally hit me. Just everything that's happening in Afghanistan, and this is just what, was it for nothing?
Was it for nothing?
Unfortunately, my own personal opinion, I think it was.
I veer between moments of huge anger and tears, to be quite honest. Tears in particular.
That despair is also felt by Major General Charlie Herbert, who commanded forces in Afghanistan.
Trillions of dollars have been invested into this campaign. Thousands of coalition lives. And to throw that away, I mean, this is an abject humiliation of the West.
In Royal Wootton Bassett, I met the Help for Heroes psychologist, currently inundated with calls from veterans of the Afghan campaign.
There's going to be a lot of wondering around, you know, what was the purpose? For us at Help for Heroes, and the important thing for us is to continue to support our veterans and their families, to demonstrate that actually there is a continuing need.
Veterans of Afghanistan know withdrawal was always part of the endgame. But to walk away with the mission in tatters, to abandon those who were promised security and peace, that's why some people are hanging their heads in Royal Wootton Bassett today. Mark Easton, BBC News. Royal Wootton Bassett.
A tropical storm is severely hampering efforts to help the survivors of Saturday's powerful earthquake in Haiti, with the number of dead now more than 1,900. Tens of thousands of people forced into temporary shelters are now having to deal with flooding, heavy winds and rain. Our correspondent James Clayton reports now from the town of Les Cayes, one of the worst affected areas.
At times, it feels like Haiti is being hit from all directions on multiple fronts. First the earthquake, then the storm. It hit just after dark, violent winds and horizontal rain. Misery loaded on top of misery.
All across this town, people have been left with a stark choice. Do they either sleep in unsafe structures, or do they decide to sleep on the streets?
Good evening and welcome.
This is the biggest camp in the area. People seeking refuge on a football field. They were told they'd be safe here, but as the rains poured, they were soaked, their tents ripped apart by the winds. The people here are desperate and angry.
We have problems here. Just look at the conditions. And where are the government? They're not here.
There are injured people here too. This woman's foot has a deep laceration, but she's had no medical attention. Another woman tells me she hasn't eaten since Saturday. The other option here is to sleep in homes already badly damaged. Josue runs the local lottery shop. He and his family were lucky the house didn't totally collapse, but they've had to make a difficult decision.
And did you sleep here last night?
Yes, I slept here in this broken house last night. There was wind and rain, but the other people in the tent city had to sleep outside on chairs.
There are simply no good options in this situation. These are desperate times, and the storm has meant that the help that is needed by air and road simply hasn't arrived. James Clayton, BBC News, Les Cayes.
Scientists in Oxford have begun trials of a new vaccine against the plague. 40 volunteers will receive the treatment, designed by the same labs that created the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID jab. The World Health Organization says anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 people get the plague every year, and some die, but due to underreporting, the true number of cases could be much higher. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Walsh.
Protection from an ancient killer, a vaccine against plague. Larissa is one of the first volunteers to receive it as part of a trial in Oxford which will assess the vaccine's safety and whether it induces a good immune response.
I'm lucky enough to live in a time where vaccines are being developed, and so when I saw that there was a study aiming at developing a vaccine against the disease that's been around for 2,000 years and that killed millions and millions of people, and so I just thought I would do my bit.
Plague is caused by bacteria found in fleas and rodents and can be spread by humans whose lungs have been infected. The deadliest pandemic in history, the Black Death in the 14th century, killed around 50 million people, half of Europe's population. Plague is thankfully now rare and treatable with antibiotics, but an outbreak in Madagascar in 2017 killed around 200 people, and there are cases each year in rural parts of Africa and the United States. Current vaccines are only partially effective, so if the Oxford jab works, it could help protect vulnerable communities.
There's no danger that the vaccine stored in this freezer can cause plague. It contains just a tiny amount of its genetic material, which has been inserted into a disabled common cold virus, the same virus that's been used to create the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine.
We've already done clinical trials using similar technology against a bacterium, meningitis B, and a virus, Zika, but we're also looking to develop vaccines against new and emerging diseases such as Lassa fever or the Marburg virus.
If the plague study goes well, then scientists aim to conduct further vaccine trials in Africa in the hope of curbing one of the biggest killers in history. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, Oxford.
The government's latest coronavirus figures show there were 26,852 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 29,564 new cases per day in the last week. 6,303 people are currently in hospital with the virus. 170 deaths were recorded in the past 24 hours, with an average of 93 deaths a day in the past week. On vaccinations, 89.6% of adults in the UK have now had their first jab, and more than 77% have had 2 jabs. And the number of job vacancies stood at a record 1 million in the 3 months to July, with much of the job growth in sectors hit hard during the lockdown. But employers are finding it difficult to fill all the vacancies, despite rising wages. Here's our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
Here are tonight's main stories.
In Kent, the fruits of economic recovery from the pandemic. A huge backlog of building work, demand through the roof, but Spencer can't find the workers to fix them.
Definitely a major shortage of personnel. It's across the board. Labourers, bricklayers, carpenters, plasterers.
How many applicants are you getting?
To these work?
Yeah.
To this? None.
None?
None.
Well, you're putting your job adverts up and nobody is applying?
Not at all, no one.
Today's jobs numbers show joblessness at 4.7%, down again in the 3 months to June, well below its pandemic peak last autumn. Vacancies have never been higher, at 953,000 in the quarter, or over 1 million in the single month of July. Though by the end of June, the latest figures show there were 1.9 million jobs still on furlough.
A record in the number of jobs vacancies reflects what's going on not just in construction, but across the economy, especially those sectors that are newly reopened, such as restaurants and pubs and hotels. It also reflects good news in the jobs market. Lower unemployment than expected, the number of jobs nearly back up to where they were before the pandemic. But the issue around labour shortages is now a very real challenge for the recovery.
On the streets of Tonbridge, the high street is returning to life, but not quite as normal. These vacancy notices, signs of our times, as employers struggle to keep up with demand returning, but without the same number of workers, after a combination of the pandemic and new post-Brexit restrictions on European workers.
I think it's a perfect storm of lots of things. So, we've had a pandemic, people have not been moving jobs, so people have been kind of sticking where they are. So you've got a lack of candidate movement. You've got a lot of EU workers that went home during the pandemic, and actually it's really difficult to get back if you want to. And the skill shortages, you're going back to a lack of apprenticeships from a long time ago that haven't been coming through. And it almost the pandemic, I think, has accelerated a problem that was already underlying.
Bye-bye.
For now, not all the vacancies match where the jobless are, nor their skills. But for those workers with in-demand skills, such as here in construction, wages are starting to rise. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Astronomers have captured some of the most detailed images ever seen of the galaxies in deep space. The pictures reveal their inner workings in unprecedented detail and show the role of black holes in creating and destroying stars and planets. Here's our science correspondent, Palab Ghosh.
Our Sun is just one among 100 billion stars in the Milky Way, which in turn is one of countless other galaxies in our universe. Astronomers have now found a way to see inside them in much greater detail. In this image, the galaxy is in the middle, shooting out either side are jets of material across the expanse of space as a result of a gigantic black hole inside it.
These jets shoot out just like a fountain of water, far, far beyond the reaches of the galaxy itself. I walked around with a huge smile on my face for the rest of the day because I felt so proud that I was able to make this image and be able to see something nobody had ever seen before.
It's just one of several new pictures obtained with the help of these aerials planted in a small field in Hampshire. These pick up radio waves from the galaxies. They may not look like much, but astronomers have connected 52 sites just like this one, spread all across Europe. Astronomers can now see things they've never been able to see before. This is a picture of a galaxy seen through a normal telescope, and here is a standard radio image of it. Although it's a lot brighter, a lot of the detail has been lost. Now compare it with one of the new high-definition images, which is much sharper. showing features inside in unprecedented detail. The brightest area at the bottom shows the location of a gigantic black hole inside this galaxy. It's bright because of the energy released as it sucks in material around it. This image shows two galaxies colliding. The bright spots are clusters of exploding stars, creating what astronomers call a galactic wind, blowing dust and gas away from it. And this is a galaxy created early on in the life of the universe, and it too has a black hole, causing jets of material to spurt out.
Even seasoned astronomers say wow at these pictures. It's become very clear that in order to understand galaxy evolution, we need to understand the black hole right at the very centre, because it appears to have a fairly fundamental influence on how a galaxy evolves.
These new images will help astronomers learn more about how the processes that created stars, galaxies and our own Earth actually work. Palab Ghosh, BBC News, Chilbolton Observatory in Hampshire.
That's it. Now on BBC One, time for the news where you are. Have a very good night.